Oh, all right. Thumbs up already. Hello, hello, and welcome everybody. Thank you all so much for being here and out there on Crowdcast. Well, yeah, adjusting the microphone. Thank you. Welcome. My name is Mike Wendt. I'm the program director here at Woodland Pattern, and we're incredibly excited to welcome Kinsale Drake and Crisosto Apache. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement and say that on behalf of Woodland Pattern, say that we acknowledge that here in Milwaukee we live and work on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homelands along the southwest shores of Michigami, part of North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. We further acknowledge the grave evil colonialism introduced to these lands through genocide, as well as slavery, but also via racist and xenophobic beliefs, laws, and practices that continue to inflict harm upon Black, Brown, and Indigenous lives. We honor those who have lived and do live now at these intersections of identity and experience and are committed to the active dismantling of white supremacy. So all of us here at Woodland Pattern could not be more thrilled for this reading, again featuring Crisosto Apache and Kinsale Drake, and presented in partnership with Indigenous Nations Poets, so thank you, INNAPO. Woo! And many thanks in particular to Kim Blazer for helping to make this happen and to help make so many things happen here over the years. Thanks also to the NEA for support of this program, National Endowment for the Arts. Thanks for that help. Let's see, we do have books for sale, a whole lot of them, but including Crisosto Apache's Ghost Word. And then there are these, if you would like, these are free to take. These are a gift for you if you would like a broadside, each one featuring a poem by one of the two poets reading this evening. I don't have much more, I promise. Just want to mention some upcoming events before I turn things over to Kim. So next weekend, we've got a pretty full weekend, and I hope you'll come back here. Friday, we're hosting our open mic, Resound Return, hosted the last Friday of every month, and it is a place to incubate new work and dust off old poems. So find your dusty poems and bring them in, and you can dust them here or before you come, whichever you prefer. That's Saturday, so that's Friday the 26th, Saturday the 27th at 7 p.m. Open mic is at 7 p.m. also, so two events back to back. Friday at 7 p.m. Saturday at 7 p.m. we're hosting reading with Sid Staity and Camille Roy, which should be very fantastic, two excellent writers. And then on Sunday, a workshop. There is still space available in The Funny Books, Making Your Own Comic Strip with Jessica Campbell, graphic novelist and visual artist. And so let us know if you're interested in that. Or anything else we're doing beyond woodlandpattern.org is where you can find out more about those things. And that's all I have to say, luckily for you. And now it's my great pleasure to turn things over to Kim Blazer, our dear friend who will introduce first Kinsale Drake and then Crisosto Apache, and has been a part of so many things here over the years. Kim, thank you so much and welcome.
It's so great to be back in Woodland Pattern in person, isn't it? Wonderful. So thank you for coming out. Thank you for Woodland Pattern for always supporting Indigenous writers. And I think that tonight the program actually does a really cool thing, which as these two poets demonstrate to us the variety of what is Indigenous writing today. Because a lot of times there tends to be that sort of pigeonholing of what Indigenous writers are or do or say, and I think you'll find it's not true. So I'm really grateful for both Kinsale and Crisosto for coming out. Kinsale has a poem in the recent poetry that's called Ancestors' Wildest Dreams. And I think that's actually a really cool tagline for her. She is the ancestors' wildest dreams. She is Diné. She is a poet, editor, playwright, and her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Poetry, Best New Poets, Poets.org, Poetry Northwest, Black Warrior Review, Teen Vogue, Time, NPR, and elsewhere. And she teaches mental health and storytelling programming for Native youth, is the founder of Changing Women Collective, as well as this really new hot organization, Indian Girls Book Club, which has really taken off. And she's doing all this cool work in the communities. So I'm really excited that she's here with us. Kinsale is a recent graduate of Yale University. She is a past national student poet that was appointed by the Library of Congress and the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. She has also held one of the spots for the inaugural INAPO Indigenous Nations Poets Fellowships. And we could go on about her at some length, but I'd love you to hear her work. She is included in this little chapbook, which I'm going to present to her now, called Dance. And whoever makes the biggest donation to Woodland Pattern, I have another copy. So please welcome Kinsale Drake.
Yeah, this is my first time up here, and I've had a lot of cheese so far, so it's been a pretty good trip so far. It's Kinsale Drake nishe, not odin tratina nishle, bilagana bashish chin, ashiha dashache, bilagana dashanella, akut ego atsana nishle. Hi, my name is Kinsale Drake. I saw somebody wearing Indian Girls Book Club. I was like, yeah! I'm Diné. My family comes from Navajo Mountain, Utah, which is southern Utah. That's the northern part of the Navajo Nation. I'm from the Drake family. If anybody watching, if they're Navajo, that would usually let them know who I am. And I currently am in Southern California, moving to the Bay Area, and I just graduated from college, so I've been having fun just writing and reading, and I know that our poetry is very different, but I think as I've been here, I've been so grateful to be, meeting everyone, and I think one thing that our poems have in common are that they can be queer and weird. Queered. We're queering poetry. So I'm just going to share a few poems. This is actually some of them are from a forthcoming collection. Some of them I just wanted to read today for fun as I was working on them. But they're all some of my favorites. The first is called Making a Monument Valley. You rock with the rose quartz, the sweetgrass, the cedar. In the summer, our city smells almost like dusk on the res. The reservoirs are shallow enough to be the old ocean, the one that covered the four corners, the Citibank building. Hook a right down Bunker Hill, the one with the city Indians, their ghosts shadowing the eucalyptus trees. Let them haunt you. I like it that way. Up the 101, thick scarlet vein, I let you go bumper to bumper, reclaim the land between each car. Fuck it, you honk. Let's be sovereign, and we riot in the fumes. Smoke rosebuds, tobacco, weed. Logically, the land's been dead a long time. The smog says otherwise. The way it rises out of the valley every other week, like a long breath released. The Santa Anas carry all the scents back to us that they tried to get rid of. Inhale. A long line of cars breaks the jagged edge. Saddleback. We stop the car, hot off Crenshaw. When you hop out, you swear the ground kicks just a little beneath your feet. Put on that KTNN. My mother was raised on Patsy Cline and Hank Williams country that bounced in on her father's radio. Even today, I know I near home when the pop music crackles into KTNN, licks of fluent Navajo flitting between Loretta Lynn and Johnny Cash. They are interludes, too, for drum beats and throaty covers of well-loved tunes put on by some local boys' gas station banjo and hot rocket guitar. A strong woman that sings the seasons over a hand drum. Then it is back to more Loretta Lynn. All contradictions find a home in the body. The insect skin of the car sluicing the Arizona desert. As the cicadas pick up their grand instruments, how else to know you enter a land of monuments, not a wasteland, loved by radio waves and peach trees and small, silly dogs that bridge the distance between a chapter house and the nearest Sonics in a city. The moon rocks darken into pine, pine into slick rock, and the whole world remembers what it once was. Grand ocean, plankton, sun, pearl, blood, ancestor, cloud. Radio rainbows the most violent parts of the land, thrashed by thunderstorm and sea, as the rattles pick up their backing track, and Hank William rolls in all over again, easy and blue. I write a lot about music, I'm sure, as you might notice. And KTNN is a radio station on the Navajo Nation that it's still around, but my mom grew up on it, and so for a long time it was like the only radio station they had out there. And you always knew you were going home when it would switch into, it would always be like fluent Navajo and then like country music. And that was it. And that was like a language of love, was like knowing you're going home, that was your homecoming. So it's a very fond memory. And I think something that a lot of folks from the Southwest kind of share their Navajo, the memories of their parents in the car while KTNN is playing. I went to school in the Northeast, I went to Yale. And this poem came out of a number of frustrations, I think, of being in the Northeast, but one of them being, it's really strange how many things are named after natives, including states like Connecticut, and how little you see them otherwise in the States. And it reminds me a lot of California as well, because, you know, there's such an issue with federal recognition and, you know, how tribes are getting recognized out there, and it's very similar in a lot of places in the Northeast. So I was driving down the highway one time, and it always made me, it's weird being Native and being young and like having an awareness that you're always on somebody else's homelands. Like even a place that it could be miserable, like LA sometimes, you have a respect for it because you're like, this is somebody's home, and like they still think of it as their home. So I always kind of thought of that when I was in Connecticut, and every time I was like, oh, I'm stuck in New Haven, I'm like, well, this is somebody's home, and only if there's no memorials for them, or you know they're moved away, doesn't mean that it's not their home. Everything is stranger in the Northeast because there are no memorials, only Indian names. The marsh islands with their little tufted backs. Someone's home. Everywhere is always someone's home. Late sun fills the window of the Amtrak Northeast. Mouths open in the trees, in the mud. Museum babies trapped in tar pits. When our bones are found, it's called a haunting. Where do the birds go? Who gets a funeral? Everything is a burial ground. Even the sky. In the old ways, this was someone's back. The constellations, bullet holes straight through his stomach, blasted with light. How many Indians must die here for anyone to know? The train babbles on about everything else. I don't want to talk about the land so much. I don't want to eco-Indian, but the marsh grasses look like the most loved and lonely parts of my body. Where do the songs go when it's dark? What names moved through the trees, the soft, the underbellies of leaves? The next one I have is Ancestors' Wildest Dreams, which is a bit sillier. If you are on social media and you have seen stuff about, your ancestors' wildest dreams. It's really hard to feel that way sometimes, especially when you get a, bad grade on a test or something and you're like, my ancestors did not survive genocide for me to fail this course or something. But this is taking that line and kind of running with it. Ancestors' wildest dreams are drunk on the sticky floor of a Denny's, texting Jima ayo aninishne and crying in the same hot breath about not knowing the right word for apology if one exists. Keyboard smashing, resilience as we delete Instagram so we don't have to see people out sacreding each other. Maybe we're only sovereign in bed, sometimes, drowning in the dark and the soft pools of their eyes, living off the hard tack of thighs, moving to an MCR mixtape we froth. Ancestors' sleep paralysis demon, caught in cold sweat and skipped therapy, untangling our bodies from sheets, always untangling ourselves out from under somewhere, fractals left in corners under juniper berry brambles. Do we even remember how Grandma baked her pies? The cornstalk stretched higher than the holy people that year, and we came home buzzed on lemonade and an auntie's laughter. Everyone is always talking about some ancestor that is or isn't pleased, but I saw a strawberry moon tonight rising. I learned the word and my language for laugh. We found it together. Dlo, 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 dlo. We eat it. We setting spray it to the page. Okay, I'll read another silly one. This is Theme for the Nautical Cowboy. I love George Strait. I just wanted to write I don't know if he's big up here. I wanted to write a poem for him. He's big down there, so this is Theme for the Nautical Cowboy. My mother wouldn't let me go to the rodeo when I was younger, so I jet off with my girl in her truck to a George Strait song. It's in our cosmology to chase the tails of dogs over the horizon. The sky stretches, map of strange stars. I list the star signs of my exes. None of them are from Texas, and we cheers our Baja Blasts. Almost all sacred things are blue. Baby blue, baby blue. You joke you'll never date a white boy. You sing a love song to straight hair and nighttime eyes. The compass needle stays glued to the moon. I catch your eyes in every mirror. There was once a prehistoric ocean all around us, even whales. We puff out the great swimming shapes of their bodies, this layer of rock, trilobites, this layer some ancient eel. How small we are here, how funny. Massive fish ghosts vibrate to George Strait, and time is read backwards in the rock body, oldest to the top, magma pushing what's fresh to the surface. Your hand skims the deep blue sandstone, these long, cooled shells. Teardrop, turquoise sliver of horizon, the creeping river invisible in the dark. Here's to you, ancient and alive. The sky stretches, full of old and older ghosts, our once and forever waiting pool. Okay, I'm gonna take off this sweater because it's kind of hot. I've never taken a sweater off in a year. It's like an outfit change. This next one, I just have a few more. This next one, I read a lot about my mom. I think a lot of poets do. And I went through, I've been through a couple, but I went through an atrocious breakup like a year ago. And when you go through that, I think that's when you really want to write. But not knowing where to start, the first thing I could think to write about was the feeling of going through the breakup and not knowing how to write about it. And so this going home and being home and on the res and being in Kayenta And seeing how many women there are just out and about doing things without a man or like without a husband, I think it was just like grounding to see. My grandma, I knew her without her husband because my grandpa had passed before I was born. And so for me, it was like just being raised by women. It was like women were everywhere when I was home. And so this poem is like a tribute to that. And also, breakups. It's like the end of the world, but it's really not. You survived the end of the world in Cayente, Arizona, with your mother, in the blue coffee pot. The waitress sets 2 tall plastic Coke cups of water before you both. Today, everyone must be especially generous. All around you, Nollies with their tight CLs and jewels and long velvet skirts that brush the floor. Once, your mother said that turquoise teardrops were a shield. Never take them off. The women smile at their grandchildren. They don't sit with any husbands, and you've become attuned again to that little song. Once, your mother said that a plate of mutton could cure any ailment. You both eat with your hands. You could have cried. Later, it's back up to Monument Valley, where the rocks look like women hushed together. KTNN buzzes. I wanted to be your everything, the only station for miles. Rock formations give nothing away, not everything you think. Once, your mother told you to use the grease left on your palms to heal your lips. So you smear a finger across an eye, and then the other. The monuments flicker, and all you want is a song about women with straight backs and dry faces, strung wholly with rain, a song you heard once when your grandmother still lived, and the roosters rampaged in the yard as she bent over the fire, and your mother smiled and looked toward the mountain behind you, feeding you mutton from her hands. Next piece that I'll read is Wax Cylinder, and then I'll borrow the broadside to read Blacklist Me, and then I'll be done. If you don't know what a wax cylinder is, it's how they used to, it was like a vinyl. So it was like a way that they would record sound and music, usually at the turn of the 20th century, and it was used a lot of the time by anthropologists. And the collection that I'm working on, which a lot of these poems are from, it's about music, but it's also about recordings and how we know Native music, like what it is now, how that came from a history of containment and violence. And so wax cylinders are really interesting because it's such a physical reminder of trying to contain a voice. But when you play them and when you illuminate those voices again, like so many poets and musicians are doing, I think of like Jeremy Ducher, who did a whole album using wax cylinder recordings. There's just no way you can inanimate a voice like that. And there's like a sort of connection that bridges so many generations when you play them, or at least when you know that they still exist and you know that they're out there, because there's a lot that haven't been returned. There's actually a lot in Germany, random enough. But this poem is literally called Wax Cylinder, and it's a bit of a fantasy. I think being at Yale and seeing things behind glass cases all the time, and being on the walls of museums, but knowing that they were somebody's and knowing that they had families, you kind of fantasize about like pulling a Michael B. Jordan in Black Panther and just like taking it and running and giving it back to somebody. So I was kind of fascinated for a while about that kind of retrieval or reanimation that could happen. Wax cylinder. There was a voice calling in the night from the small can behind the glass. The receptionist noted the sound of cicadas circling the women's bathroom. Cylinder, cicadas, legs moving round and round through a brass-colored mouth. The moon said, "Look, Shiaja," in so many words suddenly remembered. How to understand with so many voices scattered to the sea. Flat glass, laser-protected mahogany drawers. The custodian was scared of Indian ghosts in the half-light through the window. How the cylinders almost look like cedar trunks. Every night the voice would not stop singing as he defogged his windshield and zigzagged home. Shaved down to the bone of human timber, the pattern trickled after him, out the front entrance. I can't say anything new about her. She knows herself and the path home. That desert emerald, eye socket of a sow's skull. There are only 100 reruns in that body, the body a weapon when it sings. To unravel like the sun, which rotates very slowly and spills itself along, I speak back to the voice. I tell her a story. Shema, I call her, a woman remembering her place among the stars. The voice will never be lost, while constellations pulse against the sheaths of glass. Come home, scattering in our language full of light. Okay, read the last poem. I'm gonna borrow the, the broadside.
Is it the broadside?
Yeah.
Okay, I have to find it there. Sorry. No, it's fine. Oh, the big broadside. Oh, you should. Oh, I love that.
I edited this at the NAPO retreat, and that was the first time I ever heard the word rantina, which is like a angry sestina, from Deborah Miranda. She was like, hell yeah, this is a rantina. And I was like, yeah, and then I finished the poem. But when I was in undergrad, we had a professor who didn't really love poems about identity, which is like, clearly that had an effect on me, because clearly I don't ever write about identity anymore. But this was like a poem. I was really mad one day, and I did my little rantina, and this poem came out of that. It says, Blacklist Me, for Buffy St. Marie, who's my favorite musician. None of my ancestors are on the radio. None of my ancestors are, but my sister refurbished an 8-track, and I want Buffy in her purest form. Indians huddled in a basement somewhere, listening to bootleg tapes, except the basement's not a basement. It's a truck bed. It's someone's uncle's GMC wheedling over a lip of river, 'cause the best thing about rock and roll is you don't have to do anything right to survive. You don't even have to make sense to a white English professor who wants chronology when I want Buffy and a truck careening into the horizon. I want the explosion as grand as cicadas amping out the sound of night as the 8-track rolls and Buffy lives forever instead of on some balding president's blacklist. And through the smoke, I almost want to mistake a splinter of moonlight for her yellow dress. All the Indians dusting themselves off and laughing at the smolder. The little wheels spin and spin, the little wheels spin. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Kinsale. So that reminds me to mention something else that you did that you could find online, which is this whole project called Blacklist Me. Yeah, so Kinsale curated some poetry and art, I think. And can you just say where exactly to find it?
Yeah, it's a virtual exhibition on the Chapter House. So if you just do chapterhousela.org, it was like a national project, and we had Native poets, including Kimberly.
Yeah.
Yeah, poetry, music, and art, and so it was like a big exhibit that went up in the fall.
Yeah, so check that out too. So yeah, these two poets are doing all kinds of very cool things. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Crisosto Apache, and I have a little tagline from one of his poems. His poem is 37 Common Characteristics of a Displaced Indian with a Learning Disability. But here's the line I want to pull out, and then I want to say something about it. Well, I love that he exhibits dangerous attitudes, but no, he measures IQ, Indian quality, by not reading or writing well, only by mouthing off. So what I want to say, though, about Crisosto is that he does both these things. He has this really strong, resistant voice, but he's also incredibly intelligent, and he has this, intellectual bent. So he does both of those things, even though he's probably too modest to, let you know that. Crisosto Apache is I want to do this one instead, sorry. He's originally, he is Mescalero Apache, Chiricahua Apache, and Diné, with Navajo, of the Salt Clan, born for the Towering House Clan. He earned his MFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, and I found out tonight that he was of the inaugural group. We just celebrated 10 years there at IAIA of that MFA program, and he was from the first cohort, which is really cool. That's going to be historic someday. And his debut collection, Genesis, came out in 2018, and it deals with vestiges of memory and cultural identity of a self-emergence as language, body, and cosmology. His poems have appeared in Yellow Medicine Review, Denver Quarterly, Hawaii Review, Red Ink magazine, Cream City Review, woo, woo, woo. Plume Anthology, Commonplace, a Journal of Early American Life, and also in Christopher Felver's book, Tending the Fire, Native Voices and Portraits. And Crisosto is the Betty Benson Emerging Writer. He received the Betty Benson Emerging Writer Award in 2023 for his new book, Ghost Words. And so I think we're going to hear work from that. I also just want to say how excited I am that he came. I don't see my student here who brought his work to my graduate class, but one of my students fell in love with his work my last semester teaching here, so he's all around Milwaukee just because of her. But I did want to give you this little collection of broadsides from INAPO, and anybody who makes a donation to INAPO of, let's say, a certain amount would also be able to get these. So please welcome Crisosto Apache.
Good evening. It's quite an honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Kimberly. Also, thank you for, I'm just kind of beside myself, for the wonderful venue that we're reading with tonight. So I'm feeling kind of self-conscious because I feel like I smell like my dinner. So I'm like, and then I'm pumped up on coffee, so tried to have a couple of glasses of wine and it didn't help. So I'm going to read a couple of poems from my first book, Genesis Redacted. This collection came out of the MFA program that I worked with for the couple of years that I was studying at the IAI school for their MFA program. When I first entered that MFA program, I thought that I had a pretty good idea as to what I wanted to do for that program. But, of course, the universe has other plans for us. So this is what it eventually led me to, but it was a really huge fight within myself as to what I wanted to write. So what came out of that was what I'm calling my beautiful mess. So the concept for this is really the story of a self-emergence of an individual who is really trying to discover themselves for what they thought they were and who they thought they were and where they thought they came from. So that was really an exploration for what was behind this book. And the idea came for me for this book from a a conversation that I had with my mother one time about the time that I was in utero. I wanted to know like where she was going and what she was doing for the 9 months that she was carrying me. For some reason, I was really fascinated with that. And I don't know how many people have that conversation with their mothers or had. But for me, I wanted to know because not knowing those 9 months was a huge part of who I am. So that now I've had that conversation with my mother, it gives me a really good definition as to where I came from and who I am. So the thread of this book is the 9 months. It follows the 9 months of in poetry for what occurred. And I start with the first, what is maybe called the conception, and then I end with the date. The threads are broken up into two parts. One is really the conversation in the poetic voice between me and my mother. And then the second part, I did some research during that year of what was happening outside the scope of our union. And what I found out was that there was a lot of nuclear testing, atomic bomb testing in the 1970s, and then also a lot of lunar launches. So I was really kind of captivated with that. And that's a huge part behind the idea of where my culture comes from. We have a huge part of the universe that we use that's part of our ceremonies. So I'll read a few poems from this. Just one last thing. The concept for this book is I kind of wanted to look like the Bible, but I didn't want it to mimic the idea. So Genesis has been redacted to not be confused with the book of Genesis. And there's a lot of redaction in this book because I wanted to take back a lot of the history that our culture has dealt with. So this first poem I'm going to read is about my youth, and it's about the first time I went to a gay bar, and I didn't know what to expect. And this is like in a city, so... It's called, and one of the main themes of this book has to do with the intersection, so it's really a lot of X's that's portrayed in this book. So the symbology of X is throughout, whatever X means. This one's called Whole X. Strobe light quickly chases tiny slow dust. At closer view, a rainbow reflects brightly through an acrid acrylic plastic pinhole. Bodies slump in shadow while fingertips spackle wide strips of liquid on dark walls. Water drop tangles from this distant room. Limpid fluid stirs slightly, passing through fluent strobing film. Floating motifs settle around the peepholes where onlookers kneel. Split moments place erratic flicker screens, oxidizing glottal flaces erode remittent lust. Silver, red, green, blue, purple hues illume naked eyes. Latent bodies exhibit glim shots of full penetration. Rubber shades fail in the vivid salvation against blinking LED nodes. I gradually slip back inside that lurking place. I slowly slither back inside a black partition. I deliberately park behind complacent slip stops, behind light slivers and pelvic thrust rehearsals, under vinyl flaps, claret double swinging doors, back and forth, back and forth. Illumination on black lacquer walls, X. Cross-twinge hair of pornographic lament, X. Flesh nodules on fumbling light, X. Yeah, somebody who grew up on the reservation, as naive as I was when I was young, that was an experience that still is in the back of my mind, and I was like young when that happened. All right. So this next poem is called Aphesis X. Naturally, my water is gravity, a cyclic moon, rotating around Earth, a natural occurrence as I continue to exist in wisps. In ghost hair, my water recedes, my water surges, my water cascades, my water ascends, my water adjugates, my water amalgamates, my moon pulls monthly. All molecular beings emerge the same way from my womb, from my ocean, their one origin collides inside a raw recollection, reborn from my beginning, swims through a trillion-year existence, never knows exactly where beings begin, originate, an unknown factor, the two inside me palpitates with liquid, pulls together from distending sky. We slip between legs, between our fingers, and between indistinguishable gossamer hair, oceanic mitosis, barometric pressure, climate weather passages, geological fissures, glacial drifts, molding landscapes as us, allowing me to stand in breezes looking towards coastal morning, elapsing diurnal tide inside dermal cells, coursing shallow shorelines, succumbing to a homogeneous eye, a distinct pocket, a pinnacle of apogee, a spectral glimmer, in a sense of time, shining together as specks onto the retinal surface, with stolen floods of borrowing light, floating aglow, wavering high above, rotating last night, tonight, and tomorrow. My tactual light wades behind a whirling body, a mysterious cluster of pulsating beads, glistening among a vast nothing, spider eyes shifting at our own light, floating freely, giving luminescence. I burn excessive, high above the sky, rotating yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I incur behind burning solar flares, a dying birth of twinkling shards strewn, adhering to emptiness of everything archetypal, of overflowing ore, always glistening. All right. So I'm going to conclude with this book, the last entry, which is the ninth month, the moment of my birth. I wanted to end with this because I think it wasn't really the ending, but a real beginning. So, like I said, this book made me really face the sense of who I was in terms of an identity, how I fit in the world, how I fit into myself, my body, my mind, my spirit, my history, and the history that was around me. Because I represent a lot. I represent, a history that America refuses to recognize. And I think that is one thing that I always carry, and I always wonder how to every day deal with that. So the last poem of this is kind of reconciling that, I hope. Once again, a full moon positions itself between the earth and sun, absorbing all the glory of his rays, emulating. Satellite launches for the first time into Earth's orbit, and one lunar capsule plunges into the sea. Life emerges. Gul'i, my birth, August 1st, 1971 to August 7th, 1971. Emergent emanation from birth, like a cosset lamb, he is placed inside a shoebox, no constitution of place, towards tsa'ah, cradleboard, toward kwa, hoan, home, towards ndebikeya, Diné, homelands, toward ndebiza, Diné, language, life's acquisition to identity towards X, Appune to Mascal gatherers, burnt wood gatherers, and sheep harvesters. After salt is extinct, Towering houses topple. A return to origin, beginning, center fire, home, whirling. Dentist August says, everything ripens. 1971, Da'atkadan Adajindi. And that last phrase is a phrase that my mother taught me when I was young, and it translates into, they have said this a long time ago. All right, moving on. So this is my newest book, Ghost Word. It was released last year in October of 2022. This particular collection was a lot harder to do than this first collection because what I have done with this collection is to kind of go deeper into another layer of my own individuality. And many of the poems in this book are considered autobiographical, so reading them sometimes is very difficult. And an ode to strong mothers, because I come from a matrilineal society. We have to honor the women, so that's how I was brought up. So the conversations, again, from these two books have come from my mother, and I am grateful for those conversations that we have had and hopefully continue to have. All right, just a little backstory on this. The format for this book came out of a carbon copy of a manuscript from a Japanese modernist poet, Ryonosuke Akutagawa, with his last manuscript called A Fool's Life. That manuscript, or that carbon copy, was given to me by Arthur Zeed, taking one of his classes back in 1991. I carried that carbon copy for a number of years until it was like turning brown and getting frail, because largely a lot of Akutagawa's work was out of print. So looking for his work was really impossible, and this was before the internet. And it wasn't only until like 2007 that I began to look on the internet and find books of his that were being sold like for hundreds of dollars. I found 2 copies and paid the price for them because I was really wanting to read more of his work, and that A Fool's Life was also included in that. So I got rid of the carbon copy. And I still have that book, and it's been referenced and opened a lot. So the last manuscript that he had was kind of has a tragic story behind it. He wrote 51 entries to this manuscript. As he was committing suicide, he wrote these 51 entries. So for me, I was thinking, like, how can you follow like a writer who has put that much devotion into writing that they're willing to write their life's swan song into one sitting of 3 hours while you were dying? So for me, I just took the 3-hour concept and kind of ran with it, and that's what came out of this. That's what this book came out of. So it loosely follows the 51 entries, and then the third section of the book follows his work, the stories that I've read since. And if you've not read him, I encourage you to do so. His stories are influential. They're just they're very, very strong stories. Number 1, the pages. Quote, "For a time from the ladder's top, he had been watching them," unquote. R. Akutagawa, number 1, The Age. Now, more than 25 years ago, making my passage, a wandering maid confining words through a folded Athenaeum, a dark place old as fingers, turning the page shelves of overused lines on shelves, discovering more of those names calling from beyond the mountains, from beyond the sea, from beyond the madness and disheveling confessions. Repetition of tousled vowels led them into a deep lull of flat slivers, smelling the mold of replete and decay, sifting through each repeating voice as a tenacious howl. Oh, the mountains of Hanshan, oh, the disobedience of Melton, oh, the insanity of Poe and the many woes of Plath, each full of the sinking glares. If I still feel small against them, Then for that small moment in my life, I can sense the inner stutter towards each word of Anglo utterance, and forget that I ever heard calling their names. Leaning into them as twilight leans into coming dread, those names remain a decade blur of my pages. A forsaken twilight, unlike my unframing beginning, Ishkadan. My own half-century's end is still undetermined. This one's called number 6, A Sickness. Quote, thinking up life's brevity once more, he conjures up the blossoms of his palms, unquote. R. Akutagawa, number 6, Sickness. In a guttural hesitation, I scramble for an English dictionary. Much like a glottal stop, I look at the following words. Kibichi gul'i, leather boots with a toe guard. Hada'at, to sing forcibly. Tlu labai, medicinal blessing herb, 12 inches or 2 feet tall, grayish-green color with a musty smell, similar to mildew but sweeter. Its potency is better than the leaves just sprout. There is more to this scent than just being a plant. In a quick hesitation, I clamor to enunciate the stumbling sounds, but in my imaginations, the words only come out as gibberish. Tightening my hands and my eyes roll back into my tongue. To form a box shape with my larynx, I loosen the forgotten lingual lineage. Shaking the blackened voice from my sputum, I also loosen the flowing blood identity that enables me to connect my voice to the body, because I know now discover how blindly I acknowledge the bloodshed involved. This one's number 8, Fireworks. Quote, but those violent blossoms of fire, these awesome fireworks in the sky, to hold them, he would give his life, unquote. R. Akutagawa, number 8, Sparks. An ignition of colorful sparks bloom at dusk as I begin the long night dance into dawn. Scruples of tiny embers are released, and from the surging palms I grip the yucca sword, now used to shield and consecrate my movements. The sparks ascend, forming the decadent bouquets, separating form from the deepening indigo that collides with the stars. At the edge of all widening ebb, I am pulled towards the inevitable black sky, hearing the hiss of twinkling ghosts, long since burnt. Upon midnight, the intermittent crackling bursts and releases a superficial haze as the distant detonations encumbers the somber deadness of my concrete existence in a display of dissolute coloration. The light surges and hides a type of meaning. I tuck away from my relatives in the celebration meant only for those unlike me. A celebration recognizing the awful American 4th of July, redacted. All right, so this one, this poem comes out again from a conversation I had with my mother, and it's about my uncle and his service to Vietnam. When she was younger, she used to talk about how vibrant his personality was. And when he returned, he just was never the same and became a very recluse. And that really just kind of made her feel really bad about who he used to be. And the title for this poem is a particular place on the reservation. Number 12, Cariso, for E. de Kluge. Quote, the submarines inside was dim, unquote. R. Akutagawa, number 12, Naval Base. In my youth, I hitched a ride to San Diego, across chirping desert and distant night. I gazed upon a slow-moving dark encasing a convex cerulean cavity. Each night I stood beneath the sky for hours, mesmerized at the perplexed reformatory of twinkling lights and broken glass fragments spreading across the glistening sunset. A faceless man behind a lost reflection of a glass at a drive-up window informs me, "Too bad you know nothing of your past." How far will I walk against the night, confirming to a captivity I'd never realized? Some years later, under the kitchen table, they all huddle as the rampage continues toward the back of the house. A clash of debris crashes from the other room, recoils, and broken sounds escape the barricade of doors. All I remember is returning in 1970. All they remember is me sitting at the edge of my bed with the war still in my hands. I think I'm about to finish here. I get so lost when I'm reading. It's because it's just really kind of nice to be able to tell stories and talk. This one is kind of an ironic one. It's supposed to be funny, but it doesn't come across that way because it sounds funny in Apache than it does in English. And I guess that's one of the tragedies that English offers, stories from the indigenous language. But this one is called number 42, Laughter. Quote, "These words of 2-3 years ago returned," unquote. R. Akadagawa, number 42, Laughter of the Gods. One day, Coyote sees Duck walking her ducklings. Coyote asks her how she keeps them in a straight line. Duck says she sews them together with white horsetail hair every morning and tugs on the line gently until the horsehair disappears. That is how she keeps her ducklings in a row. As usual, Coyote leaves smiling. She sees a white horse grazing in the nearby field. She plucks a few strands of tail hair and returns to her burrow. The next morning, one by one, she begins to sew her pups together. When she's finished, she gently tugs on the horsehair and drags their little bodies along the ground. Coyote tilts her head in dismay and becomes distraught. She then realizes she's killed her little pups. Indians will laugh about anything and anyone, no matter the tragedy. Yeah, that's a life lesson, I suppose. But again, it's supposed to be funny in Apache, so keep that in the back of your mind. Yeah. And that's because my mother told it to me in Apache, and I understood her loosely, and she laughed, and I was kind of, well, that's kind of sad. Yeah, so. And I'm gonna share this last poem, and again, this is taken kind of in response to some of his stories, and it's not to do with the last manuscript. So this one is called Sleep, for my father Alfred. Quote, "But as long as there was darkness, he believed in light that went with it," unquote. R. Akadagawa, Cogwheels, number 5, Shako. In sleep, summer drawn a shift from slumbering eyes struggling to open, trying to remain joined with us. Distant birds bicker above the roadways where awes of emergency vehicles shrill against the drying dark igneous mesas. There is a dream and a time for resting on a long hillside where his bed opens to a widespread meadow under the overpass. Irreversible, he sighs, gone are my ills. Above, the cranes fly away from benevolence. Specks of rain begin to splash gallantly inside the elegant cupping plumes of wet deerweed. From afar, the light fights to enter the islets. as a forgotten word shifts out and unwritten. Thank you.
Crisosto and Kinsale, thank you so much. Wonderful readings. And Kim, thank you for helping to make this happen. Once again, thanks to INNIPO, Indigenous Nations Poets. If you don't know who they are and what they're doing, find out, because they're doing amazing work, Indigenous Nations Poets. So thanks to all of you who are out there, all of you who are here, and I would invite you, yeah, there's a camera over there, people on Crowdcast watching. That's who I'm talking to. But anyway, those of you here in the room with us, I'd invite you to stick around, enjoy the good company, and have a good night, everyone.